"You're too poor for our vacation, Dad." The words slipped from my daughter's lips like they were nothing, light as air, yet heavy enough to crush 20 years of fatherhood in an instant. We were standing in her sunlit kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee between us when she said it. Her tone wasn't angry. It was worse, casual, like she was telling me the weather. I stared at her, wondering if she even realized what she'd done. The girl I once carried on my shoulders at the beach, the one who used to beg me for just one more story at bedtime, now looking at me as if I were a burden she couldn't take on her trip. I could have argued, shouted, demanded respect. Instead, I just smiled, a slow, quiet smile that made her shift in her seat. Because in that moment, I knew something she didn't. I wasn't poor, and I wasn't going to be left behind. That was the moment I knew it was over. People often assume wealth is a matter of numbers on a bank statement. I've learned it's more complicated than that. Real wealth is the kind you don't see. The dinners skipped so your child can have braces, the vacations traded for overtime shifts so their school fees get paid without debt, the quiet decisions to go without so someone else can go further. For most of my life, that's the kind of wealth I dealt in. I wasn't born into money. My father was a machinist, my mother a seamstress, and our house had more love than square footage. From them, I inherited two things: the belief that family is worth any sacrifice, and the stubbornness to make those sacrifices without complaint. When my daughter Lily was born, I swore she'd never know the worry I'd grown up with. No calculating whether the electricity bill could wait another week. No pretending we weren't hungry so someone else could eat the last piece of bread. I worked in construction back then, the kind of work that leaves your hands rough and your back aching by nightfall. But it was honest work, and I was good at it. I climbed from laborer to site supervisor to project manager over the years, never turning down a job no matter how grueling or far from home. If it meant putting food on the table and a future in her hands, I was in. Lily had everything I could give her: dance lessons when she was 6, summer camp every year, a violin in middle school when she said she just wanted to try it. Even when her mother and I divorced, a quiet, tired kind of ending, not the bitter kind, I made sure Lily never felt like she had less than the other kids, and I never kept score. When she wanted a semester abroad in college, I sold the vintage motorcycle I'd been restoring for years. It's just a thing, I told myself, and she's my daughter. When she needed help with her first apartment's rent, I worked side jobs on weekends, and when she married Matt, I gave them a down payment for their first home without hesitation. I remember that wedding day vividly. Lily looked at me with eyes full of gratitude, hugging me tightly before walking down the aisle. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Dad," she'd whispered. That sentence stayed in my chest like a warm ember for years, but embers fade if you don't tend to them. As Lily's life grew fuller, with career milestones, vacations, and her own circle of friends, my place in it seemed to shrink. Calls became shorter, visits less frequent. The invitations that once felt warm began to carry an edge of obligation. I told myself it was just the way life works. Children grow up, build their own worlds, and the parent becomes a satellite orbiting quietly around them. Still, I stayed ready to help. Always. When Lily and Matt wanted to renovate their kitchen, I was there with my tools and weekends of labor. When their car broke down, I covered the repair bill as an early birthday gift. I never asked for repayment. My return was the satisfaction of knowing I could provide. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Gratitude turned to expectation. My help became less of a gift and more of an assumption. It started subtly, a request phrased more like a directive, a thank you text that came hours or days later. Then a strange formality crept into her tone, as though my usefulness was a role to be played, not a father to be cherished. Still, I brushed it off. Parents don't keep tallies, I reminded myself. The first crack I couldn't ignore came last Christmas. I'd brought over gifts. Nothing extravagant, just thoughtful things I knew she'd like. A book from an author she loved, a framed photo of us from her high school graduation. She smiled politely, thanked me, and then handed me my gift. It was a mug, a plain white mug with the words, World's okayest dad printed on it in bold black letters. She laughed when I opened it. "Come on, Dad, it's just a joke," she said, sipping her wine. Matt chuckled beside her. I smiled and played along, but that night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling for hours. Something in my gut told me that gift had said more than she realized, or maybe more than she wanted to admit out loud. Over the next few months, I noticed other small shifts. They traveled more, but mentioned it less. When I did hear about their trips, it was always after the fact. My offers to join were met with vague excuses. I didn't push. I told myself, they're young. They want their own adventures. And then came the phone call about the Hawaii vacation. It was early spring, and I dropped by her house to return a book she'd lent me. We sat at the kitchen table, catching up in the comfortable but slightly distant way we'd grown accustomed to. She told me they were going to Hawaii for 2 weeks. First-class flights, beachfront villa, the works. "That sounds incredible," I said. "When do we leave?" She laughed, but not warmly. "Oh, Dad, you're not coming?" It's kind of a young couple's trip, and besides..." She hesitated just a beat too long before adding, "You probably wouldn't enjoy it. It's expensive." I felt the air shift between us. My smile stayed, but my pulse quickened. "Expensive?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. She avoided my eyes. "I mean, you're comfortable, but not really in that league. We wouldn't want you to feel out of place." And then casually, almost offhand, she added, "You're too poor for our vacation, Dad." The words landed like a stone dropped in still water, rippling outward until the whole room felt colder. I didn't argue, didn't defend myself, didn't remind her that I had paid for more of her life than she likely remembered. Instead, I nodded slowly. "I see," I said quietly. She looked relieved, as if my calm meant the conversation was over, but in truth, it had just begun. Because what she didn't know, what she had never bothered to ask, was that I had built more than a life of sacrifice. I had built a life of quiet investments, deliberate choices, and, yes, wealth. The kind with a lot more than love behind it. And now she'd given me a reason to use it in a way she'd never forget. Next time, I'll tell you when I first saw the signs, and why I ignored them for so long. Looking back, the signs were there long before the "too poor" comment. But hindsight is like a cruel friend. It shows up only when it's too late to change what's already happened. The first flicker of it came right after Lily and Matt bought their house. I had been there every weekend for 2 months, helping them paint, fix the deck, replace the aging fence, even installing new light fixtures. When the work was finally done, they threw a housewarming party. I wasn't invited. "Oh, Dad, it was just close friends," Lily said later over the phone, as if that made sense. "You wouldn't have known most of them anyway." I brushed it off, telling myself she probably didn't want me to feel out of place. But a little part of me remembered all those weekends I'd spent sweating over their deck while they planned this close friends gathering. Then there was the Christmas I mentioned earlier, with the "world's okayest dad" mug. It was meant as a joke, they said. But the odd thing was, it wasn't the only gift like that. On my next birthday, Matt handed me a t-shirt that read, "Retired, not my problem anymore." He laughed, Lily laughed, and I smiled along, but inside, something tightened. It felt like they were slowly rewriting who I was. Not a man who had built their safety net, but someone to be gently mocked, like a quirky old neighbor. It was subtle, but the tone kept shifting. The first time I really felt the sting was during a dinner at their place. A few of Matt's friends were over, young professionals, all talking about investments, startups, and luxury getaways. I stayed quiet, listening, until one of them asked what I did for a living. "I'm in construction management," I said simply. Matt smirked. "Old school guy." Knows his way around a hammer. His friends laughed, and Lily didn't correct him, even though she knew I'd been running multi-million-dollar projects for years. It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it. Like my entire life's work could be reduced to swinging a hammer. And still, I told myself, don't make it a thing. Let it go. But letting things go has a cost. Each time you do it, a little piece of respect slips away, and eventually you wake up to find there's not much left. The next sign was about money, ironically enough. Lily called one afternoon to ask if I could lend her and Matt $10,000. She said it was for unexpected expenses after a big trip to Italy. I didn't ask for details. I transferred the money the same day. A month later, I saw pictures on social media of them at a luxury spa resort in the mountains. Not a word about repaying me, not even a thank you post. That one sat heavy in my chest. Still, I convinced myself she was just busy, distracted, young. Don't take it personally, Dad, I told myself. She's your daughter. She loves you. That's what matters. But the truth is, love without respect feels an awful lot like charity, something given out of habit, not from the heart. The Hawaii vacation conversation was just the loudest alarm in a series of smaller ones I had been ignoring for years. The week after she told me I was too poor to join them, she sent me a photo of her and Matt in front of a travel agency, grinning and holding up a mock ticket. Booked, the caption read. No invitation, no second thought. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the photo, my coffee cooling on the table beside me, and thought about every moment that had led us here. The scraped knees I bandaged when she was little, the cold nights I worked, double shifts so she could have ballet shoes, the motorcycle I sold so she could study in Paris, all of it, leading to this. It wasn't just the insult about money. It was the way she said it, the ease with which she drew a line between her world and mine, as if she had forgotten that her world had been built with my hands. I'm not a man who believes in public scenes or heated confrontations. I've lived long enough to know that real power doesn't raise its voice, but I also believe in balance, and life in that moment felt deeply unbalanced. So I decided I wouldn't just let this go. Not out of spite, but out of something I can only call self-respect. I had been written out of her version of success, and that's not a role I intended to keep playing. That night, I opened the safe in my study, a heavy steel thing that's been in my house for years, and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents most people in my life didn't even know existed. They told a different story than the one Lily had been telling herself, a story about the quiet, deliberate investments I'd been making since I was 30, about the property in Maui I'd bought outright before she finished high school, about the trust fund I'd been growing, not for myself, but for her, though I'd never told her, and yes, about the private jet I co-owned with 2 business partners. As I sat there with those papers spread before me, I didn't feel anger. I felt something colder, clearer. I realized that my daughter had spent years believing I was the man she described in her kitchen that day. Someone comfortable, maybe, but not in her league. And I realized I now had a choice. I could correct her gently, privately, and hope the respect came back. Or I could make her see exactly who she had underestimated, without raising my voice, without a fight, and without ever stepping into her world on her terms. And that's how I began to plan the quietest, most expensive revenge of my life. It happened 3 weeks before their departure to Hawaii. Lily had invited me to her house for dinner. At least that's how it was phrased in her text. Dad, come by on Saturday. We can catch up before we leave. I told myself this was her way of making amends, maybe softening the sting of our last conversation. I even brought along a bottle of wine I'd been saving, a 20-year-old Cabernet from Napa I'd received as a gift for closing one of the largest projects of my career. When I arrived, the house was buzzing with laughter. Shoes lined the entryway, jackets on hooks. I stepped inside, expecting a quiet dinner for 3. Instead, the living room was filled with people, at least 20. All friends of Lily and Matt's, judging by the unfamiliar faces. The smell of grilled seafood drifted from the kitchen, music playing low in the background. I was halfway to setting the wine on the counter when Matt's voice cut through the noise. Hey, everyone! Look who's here, Lily's dad. Heads turned, a few polite nods, and then nothing. No rush to greet me, no inclusion in the conversation. I was just another guest, peripheral, orbiting the center of their evening. Dad, grab a plate, Lily said distractedly, pointing toward the kitchen, before turning back to her friend's story about the villa's infinity pool. It took me less than 5 minutes to realize this wasn't a pre-trip dinner with me. It was a bon voyage party. for Hawaii. I stood there, holding a paper plate, listening to them discuss snorkeling excursions, private luau's, and the spa package Lily found for half price. They were planning every detail right in front of me, as though I wasn't there, or as though I had no reason to care. Then came the moment that solidified everything for me. One of Matt's friends, a tall man in an expensive linen shirt, asked, "So, is your dad coming along?" Lily laughed, not unkindly, but in that same casual way she'd used before. "Oh, no. Dad doesn't really do this kind of trip." She gestured vaguely, as if this kind explained everything. "Besides, it's a bit outside his budget." The friend nodded sympathetically. "Makes sense. These things get pricey." My chest tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. I didn't correct her. I didn't mention that I'd been to Hawaii more times than she knew, or that I owned a house there. Instead, I set my plate down and excused myself to the backyard. It was quieter there, the cool evening air carrying the scent of jasmine from the neighbor's garden. I took a long breath and let it out slowly. I thought about the decades of sacrifice, how I'd missed holidays, birthdays, and even her school plays because I was working late to ensure her life was better than mine had been. I thought about every check I'd written, every weekend I'd given up to help her, every sure honey when she needed something. And then I thought about how, in this moment, none of that existed for her. I wasn't the father who built her foundation brick by brick. I was a supporting character in her curated life. A few minutes later, she came outside, a cocktail in her hand. "Dad, are you okay?" "You're missing the fun." I forced a small smile. "Just needed some air." She nodded, clearly eager to get back inside. "Well, don't be a stranger. You know how these nights fly by." She kissed my cheek lightly and was gone. I stayed in the yard another half hour, pretending to admire the landscaping, while the voices and laughter inside rose and fell like waves I'd been pushed away from. When I left, no one noticed. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Thanks for coming, Dad. It meant a lot that you stopped by." I stared at the message for a long time before typing, "Of course. Have a great trip." And that was when the shift happened. Up until then, I had been telling myself that her words about me being too poor were thoughtless, careless at worst, that maybe she was embarrassed or trying to protect me from feeling out of place. But now, I saw it clearly. It wasn't just that she thought I couldn't afford it. It was that she didn't think I belonged. That realization didn't make me angry. Anger is hot, and it burns itself out quickly. What I felt was cold, clean. It was the kind of clarity you get when you finally accept something you've been denying for too long. From that point forward, I stopped waiting for her to invite me back into her world. I stopped hoping she'd see me differently on her own. If she wanted a version of me that was smaller, simpler, and easier to dismiss, well, she was about to find out how wrong she'd been. Not with shouting, not with bitterness, but with a single, deliberate act she'd never see coming. A week before their departure date, I made a few calls, checked my schedule, confirmed a few arrangements I'd been holding on to for a long time, and then I called an old friend, one of my business partners in a certain luxury asset we shared. "Think the jet's free next week?" I asked. "Where are you headed?" he replied. I smiled, picturing the turquoise waters, the warm breeze, the gentle sway of palm trees. "Hawaii," I said. "Thought I'd spend a couple of weeks at the house." "Taking company?" "Maybe," I said, "but not the kind you're thinking of." What Lily didn't know, and what I'd never told her, was that 20 years earlier, after completing one of the most profitable projects of my career, I had taken a significant portion of the payout and bought a piece of land in Maui, built a modest but beautiful home there, paid in full, no mortgage. Over the years, I'd spent time there quietly, usually off-season, enjoying the privacy. No photos on social media, no mentions in casual conversation, just my place, my retreat, and I had never thought to use it as anything but a personal getaway, until now. This time, it wasn't just a vacation, it was a statement. And that's how the plan began to take shape, not to ruin her trip, but to redefine the way she saw me. Forever. Revenge, when done right, doesn't feel like revenge. It feels like balance is being restored. I didn't want to hurt Lily. I didn't want her to come home from Hawaii to a life in ruins. I wanted something quieter, something she would remember. Not because it was cruel, but because it was undeniable. The truth was, she had been living in a story where I was cast as the aging, modest father, the man she could thank for everything in a sentimental toast, but never quite picture sitting beside her in first class or staying in a 5-star villa. My plan wasn't to argue my way into her version of reality. It was to rewrite it entirely. The first step was to call Peter, my co-owner of the jet. He and I had gone in on it years ago, along with a third partner, a tech consultant named Renee. We each had usage rights for several weeks a year, and it had saved us a fortune in long-haul travel while offering privacy no commercial airline could match. "Peter," I said when he picked up, "is the jet free starting Monday?" "Let me check. Yeah. Looks like Renee's not booked it, and I don't need it until the 20th. "What's up? Finally taking that trip you keep talking about?" "Something like that," I replied. "Maui, thinking of staying 2 weeks. You going solo?" I hesitated. "Haven't decided yet. But I do plan on making an entrance." He laughed. "That's not usually your style." "It's a special occasion." After securing the jet, I called the caretaker for my Maui house, Lonnie. She had been looking after the property for nearly 15 years, keeping it immaculate whether I was there or not. "Mr. Carson," she greeted warmly. "It's been too long." "I'm coming in next week," I said. "Can you stock the cena? Fridge, make sure the pool's ready? And Lonnie, go all out. Fresh flowers, the works, like I'm hosting royalty." "Of course." "Guests?" "Maybe," I said again, letting the word hang in the air. The truth was, I wasn't sure yet if I'd invite anyone. This trip was less about company and more about presence, about being seen, not in the bragging, show-off way I'd always avoided, but in the visible truth way. That meant one more step, making sure Lily would see it. I didn't want to post a dozen selfies or drop my location in some flashy look-at-me announcement. That wasn't my style. But I knew Lily followed a handful of people in my orbit, mutual friends who occasionally shared photos from events or gatherings. All I had to do was make sure my trip looked effortlessly documented without it being obvious that I'd orchestrated it. I called Rachel, a photographer friend who often traveled with clients for lifestyle shoots. "How would you like 2 weeks in Hawaii?" I asked. She laughed. "Are you serious?" "Very. You'd have full run of the house, ocean views, and I might need you to snap a few casual shots. Me on the terrace with coffee, reading by the pool, walking down the beach. Nothing posed, nothing flashy, just life, as it is." Rachel had an instinct for capturing things that looked natural, but told a story. She agreed immediately. With that in place, all I had to do was wait. But waiting is never idle. While the days ticked down to Lily's departure, I kept my interactions with her deliberately light. When she sent a group text about their pre-trip checklist, I responded with a thumbs-up emoji. When she mentioned how crazy expensive things were getting in Hawaii, I said, "Sounds like you'll have an amazing time." I wanted no sign of what I was planning. The morning of their flight, she called briefly to say goodbye. "We'll send pictures," she said cheerfully. "I'm sure you will," I replied, my voice steady. What she didn't know was that, less than 12 hours later, I would be landing on the same island. On the jet, as the mainland disappeared beneath a stretch of endless blue, I sipped coffee and looked out the window, feeling no bitterness, just a strange, calm anticipation. I wasn't chasing her trip. I wasn't following her around the island. I didn't even intend to run into her directly, but I knew Hawaii, the resorts, the beaches, the little tucked-away restaurants. I knew how small the social world of a place like that could feel, how one photo, one chance sighting, could ripple through mutual connections. And that was enough. Because sooner or later, she would see it. She'd see me, not in a recliner back home waiting for her to bring me souvenirs, but in the same place she'd deemed too expensive for me. She'd see that the man she thought couldn't belong had been there all along. By the time we touched down in Maui, Lonnie had the house, glowing, The scent of fresh plumeria filled the air. The pool shimmered under the late afternoon sun. On the counter sat a basket of local fruit, and in the fridge, everything I liked, plus a few indulgences I hadn't asked for. Rachel arrived the next morning, camera in hand. We spent the day exactly as planned. No staged glamour shots, just snippets of life. Morning coffee on the lanai, reading a hardcover novel with the Pacific stretching out behind me, standing at the water's edge, the hem of my linen pants brushing the sand. It was all real. That was the point. By the third day, the first ripple appeared. A mutual friend, Mark, posted a photo to his Instagram story, a wide shot of me and Rachel on the terrace, coffee cups in hand. The caption read simply, "Morning views at Carson's place." Paradise. I didn't need to tag anyone. I didn't need to post it myself. What happened next wasn't planned, but it made my quiet little message impossible to ignore. Some things in life you plan down to the last detail. Others, life plans for you. By day 4 in Maui, my plan was already in motion. The social ripple I'd anticipated was happening, small, subtle, but steady. Mark's post had been seen by over 100 of his followers, many of whom were also in Lily's social orbit. One had even commented on it. "Is that Lily's dad?" Mark didn't reply, which was even better. It left room for curiosity. Rachel kept capturing moments, not for my vanity, but for the story I wanted to tell without ever speaking it aloud. A glass of wine at sunset, a stroll through Lahaina's art district, a candid shot of me chatting with a local fisherman by the pier. It all looked effortless, uncalculated, which, of course, was exactly the calculation. Then, on the 5th morning, life gave me an unexpected assist. Rachel and I decided to have breakfast at one of my favorite spots, a small, open-air cafe known for its papaya bowls and ocean views. It wasn't touristy, at least not usually. But that morning, as we rounded the corner and I spotted the tables, I froze. 2 tables away, facing the sea with her hair pulled back in a loose bun, sat Lily. For a heartbeat, I thought maybe I was imagining it, but then she laughed, her unmistakable laugh, and turned just enough for me to see Matt across from her, both of them wearing that sun-kissed first week of vacation ease. I hadn't planned to see them here. I'd told myself that if we crossed paths at all, it would be through some filtered social media sighting or a story passed along by friends, but here they were, not 20 feet away. Rachel noticed immediately. "Do you want to leave?" she whispered. "No," I said, my voice calm. "Let's stay." We took a table within their line of sight, but not directly in front of them. I didn't acknowledge them, didn't wave. Instead, I behaved exactly as I would if they were strangers, ordering coffee, chatting with Rachel, smiling at the view. It took less than 3 minutes for Lily to notice. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her head turn, then pause. Her expression froze for a fraction of a second. Then she whispered something to Matt. Matt's head turned too, his brows knitting together. I didn't look their way. I simply lifted my coffee cup, took a slow sip, and kept talking to Rachel about the farmer's market we planned to visit later. When our papaya bowls arrived, Rachel snapped a quick photo, me mid-laugh, the ocean behind us. She posted it to her story without tagging me. We finished breakfast and left without ever acknowledging their table. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lily. "Dad, are you in Maui?" I waited 10 minutes before replying. "Yes." Another message came almost immediately. "Why didn't you tell me?" I typed slowly. Didn't think I could afford it. And then silence. Over the next few days, it became impossible for them not to see me. Maui isn't huge, and the vacationing social circles are even smaller. On the 7th day of their trip, Rachel and I attended a charity art auction at a beachfront estate, an event I'd been invited to through an old client. Lily and Matt were there too. I arrived in a navy linen suit, greeted by name by the hosts who I'd known for years. Rachel floated easily through the crowd with her camera, capturing the event for the organizers. I saw Lily spot me from across the patio. This time she didn't look away. She approached slowly, Matt trailing just behind her. "Dad," she said, her voice a mix of curiosity and something else, something I couldn't quite place yet. "Lily," I said warmly. "Matthew, enjoying your trip?" "Yes," she said, glancing around. "We didn't know you'd be here." I smiled. "I've had the house here for years. This event is just down the road." Her eyes flickered, processing that. "The house?" "Uh-huh," I said casually, as though I were talking about a cabin in the woods instead of a prime piece of Maui property. "Bought it after that big project in 2003. Lonnie takes good care of it when I'm not here." Matt opened his mouth, then closed it. Lily hesitated, as if deciding whether to ask more or let it go. In the end, she just said, "Well, it's beautiful here." "It is," I agreed, "and I'm glad you're getting to enjoy it." Then I excused myself to greet the host, leaving them standing there with their questions. The final deliberate stroke of my plan came on the last day of their vacation. I knew their flight back was at noon. That morning, Rachel and I boarded the jet from Kahului to San Diego, just a short hop for a meeting I had arranged with a client there. As we walked toward the aircraft on the private tarmac, Rachel snapped one last photo, me at the base of the jet's stairs, boarding pass in hand, sunrise lighting the edge of the runway. She posted it without caption, without tag. Bibina Sanyen. The time Lily and Matt were in the air on their commercial flight, I knew she would have seen it. Not because I sent it to her, never that, but because enough mutual friends followed Rachel for it to drift into her feed like a pebble into still water. That night, back at my house, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the deck, watching the last of the light fade over the ocean. My phone buzzed again. This time, the message was longer. "Dad, I feel like I owe you an apology. I didn't know about the house, the jet, any of it. I shouldn't have said what I said. It was wrong." I let the words sit there. I didn't respond right away. After a while, I typed back, "It's not about the house, Lily, or the jet. It's about respect. I've never cared whether you thought I was rich or poor, but I do care how you see me." Her reply came minutes later. "I understand, and I'm sorry. I mean that." I didn't say, "It's okay. Some things shouldn't be tied up neatly in a bow." But I did say, "I'm glad you had a good trip." And that was the end of it, for now. My revenge hadn't been loud. There were no arguments, no slammed doors, no public scenes. But it had been effective. I hadn't tried to humiliate her or make her feel small. I'd simply shown her a truth she had chosen not to see, and let that truth do its work. She had learned, without me ever saying it outright, that she'd misjudged me, that the man she thought she could write out of her world could very easily exist in it, and in ways she hadn't imagined. I didn't need more than that. What happened when we finally spoke face to face after the trip was a different kind of reckoning entirely. When Lily got back from Hawaii, she called me within 2 days. Not a casual, "How have you been?" call. This one was deliberate, voice softer than usual, as though she was picking her way across a floor she knew might creak in the wrong places. "Dad, can we meet for lunch? Just us?" I agreed, choosing a quiet restaurant halfway between our homes. It was the kind of place where the tables are far apart, the music is low, and the waiters know how to vanish when needed. When she walked in, she looked different. Not physically, same warm eyes, same careful makeup, but in her posture. Shoulders drawn in, hands clasped together, her confidence trimmed at the edges. We ordered, exchanged small talk, and then she took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot since Hawaii," she began. "About the way I've treated you." I stayed silent, letting her fill the space. I let myself believe a version of you that was easy. One where you were just there, always helping, always saying yes. I didn't think about what that cost you or what your life really looked like outside of what I needed." Her voice wavered slightly, but she held my gaze. "And then seeing you there, not just there, but belonging there, it made me realize how wrong I was. I didn't move, didn't rush to comfort her, and sometimes silence is the most honest reply." She pressed on. "I embarrassed you, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I took a sip of water before answering. It wasn't an embarrassment, Lily. It was clear. You showed me exactly how you saw me, and I couldn't unsee it. Her face tightened. I know, and I hate that I made you feel that way. The food arrived, but neither of us touched it. Dad, I don't want this to be what we are now, she said. I want to make it right. How? I asked. My voice was calm, but it carried weight. She blinked, caught off guard. I thought saying I was sorry. Sorry's a start, I said. But if you want to make it right, it's not about grand gestures. It's about respect, every day. In the small things, she nodded quickly. I understand. Do you? I asked. Because respect isn't a gift you hand over once. It's how you speak, how you listen, how you value someone even when they're not doing something for you. Her eyes glistened, and she looked down. I've been selfish. I didn't correct her. She needed to say it and sit with it. Then she said something I hadn't expected. Matt and we had a fight after that breakfast. He said I was out of line, that I've been out of line for a while. He told me he didn't like the way I spoke about you. I raised my eyebrows. Is that so? She nodded. It wasn't a huge fight, but it stuck. And when we saw you at the auction, he told me later, your dad carries himself like someone who doesn't need anyone's approval. You should think about that. That made me pause. Matt wasn't a man I considered an ally, but those words, they were a crack of light through a very thick door. We finished lunch slowly, talking about nothing and everything. She asked more about my house in Maui, about the work I still did, about the people I'd met over the years. It was as if she was seeing me not as a static figure from her childhood, but as a man with his own life. When we stood to leave, she hugged me tighter than she had in years. I'll do better, she whispered. I didn't promise forgiveness. I didn't tell her everything was fine. I simply said, we'll see. Over the weeks that followed, the shift held. Her texts became warmer, more frequent, but not in the clingy way of someone trying to repair guilt overnight. It was measured, respectful. She started inviting me to things without the subtext of obligation. Matt reached out too, asking if I wanted to join them for a weekend trip to the mountains. I declined, not out of spite, but because I wanted them to know my time was mine. There was no dramatic collapse, no public fallout. Her downfall wasn't a loud humiliation. It was internal. The slow, dawning realization that she had misjudged the one person who had never stopped standing in her corner. And for me, that was enough. Because true revenge doesn't leave scars. It leaves lessons. But the real closure came later, in a moment so small it could have been missed, if I hadn't been listening for it. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, months after their trip. Lily and Matt had invited me over for lunch. No big occasion, just a casual afternoon. The kind of thing we hadn't done in years without a holiday forcing it. The table was set outside, shaded by a large umbrella. Matt was grilling, Lily setting out plates. It all felt easy, unforced. Halfway through the meal, as we sat talking about nothing in particular, Lily put her fork down and looked straight at me. You know, she said, before Hawaii, I used to think of you as... She stopped, choosing her words carefully. As steady, reliable. But I never really thought about what it took for you to be that way, or that you had a whole other life I knew nothing about. I didn't interrupt. She smiled faintly. And I don't mean the house or the jet. I mean you, who you are, the life you've built. I'm proud of you, Dad. It was such a small sentence, quiet, simple, but I could hear the weight behind it. I nodded, letting it land without rushing past it. Thank you, I said. That means more than you think. Matt lifted his glass. To family, he said. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in a long time, the air between us felt clear. Driving home later, I thought about how different this ending could have been. I could have lashed out, cut her off, or kept score for the rest of my life. I could have tried to teach her a lesson with anger, the way so many people do when they feel wronged. But instead, I'd chosen patience. And patience had given me something anger never could: dignity. Because in the end, it wasn't about proving I was rich enough, smart enough, or important enough. It was about showing, without saying, that I had always been more than she assumed. That I didn't need her validation to stand tall, but I also wasn't afraid to let her see me clearly. The best revenge isn't about knocking someone down. It's about letting them watch you stand exactly where they thought you never could. That night, as the sun set behind my home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat out on the deck. The phone buzzed beside me, a message from Lily. "Love you, Dad." I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because respect had returned. And once you've regained that, you don't need much else. Dignity doesn't demand recognition. It commands it. Sometimes the most powerful way to change how someone sees you is to let the truth speak for itself.